Well, I want to thank you all for being at the HSO conference today. My name is Varun Soni. I'm the Dean of Religious Life at USC. I'm very grateful to the student organizers who worked so hard to put this event together. Very grateful to the many speakers we have. Mostly, I'm grateful to all of you for being here. It's not often that Hindu student leaders come together and have student-to-student interactions. And I think more than anything, today is an opportunity for Hindu student leaders around the country to meet each other, to develop close relationships, to think about collaboration, to think about how we can all work together towards our common goals. Anju Bhargava, who many of you may know, she's the head of the Hindu American Seva Charities and also the Hindu advisor to President Obama. She sits on a faith-based committee. Really wish she could have been here today. She couldn't, but she wanted me to let you know how impressed she is with all of your efforts and initiatives to think about Hinduism in the form of seva, or in the form of service. And you should also know that the White House is going to do an event this summer, a Hindu youth leadership event. And they're looking to us today for takeaway points, for bullet points. Whatever comes out of this meeting will go to the White House, and all of you will be involved in a conversation then about this upcoming meeting. So what I see us doing today is planting the seeds for something that hopefully is annual and national, and also creating relationships with other organizations on both local levels and national levels, like the White House. In my own life, and I also say this, in the Office of Religious Life, we're often bringing together Jews and Christians and Muslims and Hindus. It's a lot harder to bring together Trojans and Bruins, and we did that today. So I think this is a huge kind of victory for us today. So it's really nice to have UCLA. And I'm at USC, but I went to law school at UCLA, so it's especially important for me to have that kind of relationship. What's that?
We didn't cover the Trojans today.
Well, I'm representing Trojans today, but it's good to have UCLA representation as well. You know, in my life, I grew up really as a child of the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act. My parents immigrated in the early 70s. My generation was one of the first generations to be really born and raised Hindu American. But Hinduism obviously has had a long influence in the United States, all the way back to the beginning of our country. Some of our founders were reading the Vedas. The transcendentalists like Thoreau and Emerson were really very impacted by the Bhagavad Gita. Thoreau took a copy of the Gita with him to Walden when he wrote his famous Walden essay. Emerson's Oversoul is really based on Atman and Brahman. So, and then of course we have the gurus in the 60s, the countercultural movement. We have 15 million people in the United States doing yoga. So in a way, India has permeated the American popular imagination. There was a recent Newsweek article saying we're all Hindus now, talking about how Americans are increasingly comfortable with ideas of reincarnation and pluralism, very Hindu ideas that have seeped into kind of the American popular consciousness. But for my generation, it was difficult growing up Hindu American because we didn't have anyone in the public sphere. We didn't have many Hindus that we knew growing up. I went to a Catholic school growing up. It was difficult for me to hear about injunctions against idolatry and come home and see multiple manifestations of the divine. And I think that many in my generation, Generation X, not yours, millennials, but in my generation, Generation X, struggled with their Hindu American identity growing up. And it wasn't until I got to college, when I got to a research university, that I really began to explore what it meant to be Hindu. Because that was the first time I was able to take classes on Hindu scripture, history, theology, philosophy, etc. It was the first time I was able to study abroad. I went to India and I learned more about my own cultural tradition. So I think the irony being Indian American or Hindu American is that many of us find out about our own cultural identity through a Western research university. That being said, I think it's a remarkable opportunity that we all have, that you all have. In a university context, you can bring together the spiritual and the scholarly. You can study your own faith tradition from a critical point of view in the classroom, history, language, culture. But you can also come together as Hindus in a spiritual context, as a sangha of sorts. You can come together to explore what it means for you to be Hindu or religious in your own personal life. So bringing together the spiritual and scholarly is a unique opportunity that you have in your university communities. Bringing together the Hindu world. Today we have Hindu Americans and Hindus from India here. We have undergraduates and graduates. We have people that represent the diversity of the spectrum of what it means to be Hindu from all countries in the world. And that is really something that can only happen, I think, in a university context. It's much harder to do this in a critical mass elsewhere. We have 1,800 students from India here at USC, but we also have a large number of Hindu American, Indian American students, and they're in conversation with each other in a way that they might not be able to be in conversation with each other elsewhere. I also think you have the remarkable opportunity for interfaith engagement, to have Hindus sit at the table of the interfaith conversation. And you've done wonderful work at your campuses, I'm sure. We've done some interesting stuff here at USC. The one experience I've had that really sticks with me is after the Mumbai terrorist attacks. We had Hindu students from India and Muslim students from Pakistan come together, talk about what it meant to be victims of terror, because we were both victims of terror. Talk about what their faith tradition said about violence. Read from the Gita and the Quran. Light candles with one another. Embrace one another. That's something that wouldn't happen in India. It's something that wouldn't happen in Pakistan. But it happens in the global diasporic research university context. So we can do things on our campuses that we might not be able to do anywhere else in the world. And finally, bring together the personal and the professional in your life. Your generation, the millennials, born after 1982. I call you guys the post-Thriller generation. Born after the release of the album Thriller. I can't even imagine being born after that, but I'll say the post-Thriller generation is a generation that lists meaning and purpose as one of the top things you want out of your career. You're the first generation to do that. Previous generations were looking for security and status. You want meaning and purpose, right? And I think you realize that in our country, we all work really hard. And if you're not happy in your work, you're not happy in your life. And you come to sort of an enlightened approach about your career. But how do you bring together the personal and the professional? How do you find meaning and purpose in your life? That's not just a professional question. That's a spiritual question. And I find as Hindus, we have a unique approach to this. Like my friend who's a physician who does healthcare work in South Los Angeles, underserved neighborhoods, say that as a Hindu, his spiritual practice is his medical practice. And I have lawyer friends who do pro bono work who say that aspect of their work, their legal practice, is their spiritual practice. I think that as Hindus, we have the remarkable opportunity to think deeply about what it means to bring together our spiritual and scholarly lives and our personal and professional lives. I think there are three very important opportunities for all of us as Hindu Americans to contribute to the larger discourse on religion in the United States. The first is the model of pluralism that India has. As you know, India is not only the birthplace of many unique religious traditions, it's the home of all religious traditions. And for thousands of years, or at least many hundreds of years, many of these religions have not only coexisted side by side, but have thrived side by side, and have actually shared each other's scriptures and sacred spaces and rituals and literary themes. And so